Hey, Alan,
Yes.
are you talking to me?
All right. Okay. I made a little note to myself. I said if Saul makes the worst talking to me reference ever, I'm never talking to him again.
Get it out of the way up front. It's done. We can move past it.
All right. Good.
Okay, we've done it. So,
done it.
hello, welcome to Diminishing Returns. This week is Taxi Driver. We've been joking about the complete lack of Martin Scorsese on this podcast, which has run for over 200 episodes at this point. The fact that we have yet to really get into Martin Scorsese. We did touch on The Irishman for our recent Oscars episode, but other than that, I don't think we've ever covered a Martin Scorsese movie. Is that correct, Alan?
That's correct. And if you'd like to start this discussion with a little chat about Scorsese, that would be fine by me.
Okay. So that voice there, just chiming in with the accuracy of my statement there, that was Alan.
Hello.
I'm Sol. Thanks for joining us this week on Diminishing Returns.
Yay. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking whilst watching this film, I was thinking about Martin Scorsese, and I was of all the. First, I was thinking, it's funny how Scorsese never quite went Hollywood, did he? I mean, he never quite went mainstream in the way that, say, Spielberg did, and yet has maintained this presence as, a household name director.
Well, you know what I found bizarre is that he's always been kind of mid-level 1970s Hollywood, I guess, because, my take on this film when I watched it back in the day was that, it was some little project from Martin Scorsese and blah, 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 blah. Reading about it last night after I rewatched it, no, it was just a script that had been developed. There were some producers coming along, and Martin Scorsese was a hired gun they brought in after Brian De Palma, I think it was. Brian De Palma decided he didn't want to do it.
Well, he hadn't done a lot by that point, and it had all been this kind of low-budget, scrabbling on the streets of New York kind of filmmaking. He'd just done Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which had kind of raised his profile.
I watched that with you, I believe. Is that back in London?
Oh God,
I think we both watched that film for the first time together.
That's possible, yeah. I can't remember. Also, De Niro, in between signing the contract to do this film and actually doing the film, won an Oscar for Godfather Part 2, which sort of changed the nature of it. So, 3 months after, they wouldn't have been able to get him because he would have been too expensive. He agreed to do it. He agreed to, honour the contract. Obviously, he had history with Scorsese, so he was willing to do it. So yeah, it was kind of one of those moments of like things coming together, and it took off. So it is as small a film as it looks, I guess, is the point.
Can you do a Robert De Niro impression? You strike me as someone who might have that in you tucked away. It's very hard to do a good Robert De Niro without the visual aid of being able to squint your eyes.
Yeah, I'm doing the face right now, and you can't.
Yeah. But it's the voice. I can't figure out the voice. I can do the eyes fine, but it's
the downturned mouth.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to do it.
Probably a wise choice.
So Scorsese, let's just focus on Scorsese for a minute.
Marty.
People
in Hollywood call him Marty. It's always very jarring when they introduce him at the Directors Guild and places like that. A cinematic legend, Marty Scorsese. Him and who's the other one? Bob Zemeckis.
So just a quick look at Scorsese here, and so he did Taxi Driver. He followed that with New York, which wasn't particularly successful. But then after, he did The Last Waltz documentary, which was sort of a different direction. But then he did Raging Bull, which was obviously another big success, but is also a small kind of drama, really. It's doing The Color of Money feels like more of a Hollywood job, but then follow that with Last Temptation of Christ, and then Goodfellas in 1990.
Well, I don't really... Martin Scorsese is someone I really need to dig into and just watch everything he's ever made, because I feel like quite a Scorsese novice, really. I've seen a lot of his films, but there's a lot of gaps there. There's a lot of his stuff that I haven't seen.
Yeah.
And so I don't really have much of a sense of his career overall, what you're kind of working through here.
Yeah, I guess yeah, that's fair, but that's what I mean. I think there's these sort of he'll like every 10 years he'll just whack out a massive film that's just like redefines what we know about him and about cinema. Maybe that's a bit over the top, but you know, Gangs of New York was 2002. The Departed was a big success, although I don't think that was particularly groundbreaking or anything. The Aviator was kind of more Hollywood, literally, but that felt more kind of playing to a mainstream audience.
What would you say is his last huge, groundbreaking, you know, really universally acclaimed film? Because to be honest, I'm just looking at his CV now. I think you've got to go back to The Departed for the last one that really hit those levels. I
don't know. Was The Wolf of Wall Street, how was that taken in general? It's really well regarded, I think.
Very well. People liked it a lot, but I think it's a lot more hit and miss, that one. Like The Irishman, it depends who you're talking to. Some people call it a masterpiece, but there's a lot more criticism of it. You know, then that's the thing with most of his films, like Shutter Island and Hugo. I'm sure Silence, if you can actually find someone who's seen it. They're all films that have their champions who will go to bat for them, who, you know, hold them up as absolute masterpieces. But overall, I think most of those films are just kind of like, yeah, it's a well-regarded Martin Scorsese film. Whereas I think The Departed and, you know, Goodfellas and so on transcend that. You know, they're films that my mum would watch, if you know what I mean. It's that level of mainstream.
But I think if you were going to say what is Scorsese, you would go, what is his career? You'd say Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas.
Goodfellas, yeah, I'd say Goodfellas first of all.
Casino feels like sort of Goodfellas' cousin, really.
Goodfellas is the defining Martin Scorsese film, I think, quite massively. And yeah, Casino is very much a sort of spiritual sequel to that film. It doesn't really have anywhere close to the same cultural significance.
Yeah, and then I think, you know, he's been nominated Best Director Oscar 9 times. He's won it once. He won for The Departed, which is not his best film. Yeah. But I bring that up because I think when I was watching Taxi Driver, I just watched it today to refresh my memory, the one thing that really I want to see more of is the director. Like, I watched that and I've got things that, you know, we'll talk about. The one thing that jumps out at me is that this is a director who's trying to do something and is doing something, and not just showing a story. They're playing with the subtext, they're playing with imagery, they're playing with camera movement, and that is good directing.
Oh, massively, yeah.
And of course, that's what is not rewarded because he wasn't nominated for Taxi Driver, even though it was nominated for Best Picture and Best Actor and Actress, supporting actress, I suppose.
76 was a weird year at the Oscars, though, wasn't it? Is that Rocky that year? Or is that the previous year?
Rocky's 76.
Well, it was the 77 Oscars for the films of 76. I'm just looking up what actually was. That was the year of Rocky. So Rocky won, didn't it? That's the Best Picture winner.
Best Picture, yeah, definitely.
So I mean, not to, well, spoiler alert, it is to give something away. I'd say Taxi Driver is a much better film than Rocky, personally, on pretty much every single element of the film is better, if you ask me. And I say that as someone who likes Rocky a lot.
I would probably say it is a better film on most aspects, other than, say, just entertainment, watchability.
Well, I disagree with you there, but I think what you're getting at is that Rocky has a kind of mainstream, feel-good appeal. You know, it's like giving the Oscar to Green Book over Roma. You know, it's like one may arguably have more artistic value than the other, but it's being a crowd pleaser wins you a lot
My
of points.
argument here for Taxi Driver is that it's a great piece of art, but not necessarily all that. It's a good film, but I don't walk away from this feeling like I've had a good experience. I think that's basically what it is, and I don't think you're necessarily supposed to. I think it's supposed to be quite
interesting. Yeah, I mean,
horrible.
Oh yeah, it's not a pleasant experience in that sense, but you know, in terms of just putting a film on just to enjoy it as a pure piece of entertainment, I get that out of Taxi Driver. I find I was really struck by it last night how breakneck I found the pacing, because it's you know, it's nearly 2 hours long. It's not a short film. And my memory of it is it's very talky, and I thought, okay, is this going to hold up? And then it felt like 10 minutes after I put it on, he started shooting people, and I was like, oh, bloody hell, I forgot he shoots someone this early on, and we have all this stuff before he gets to the big massacre at the end. And then he went upstairs, and I was like, oh no, this is it. This is the end of the film. Okay,
It's interesting,
wow.
because I think
flew past for me. Yeah,
I think the note I made was that it's slow. In fact, a note I made is that I think this is deliberately slow paced, to give it a kind of hypnotic quality. I think it's not supposed to. I guess it's supposed to take you. It's supposed to mesmerize you.
Yeah, well, I think that's it. It works for me. It does that to me.
I feel like I need to watch this film in a cinema, in the darkness, and sort of sit there and take it in. Because I don't think it is one of those films that's made for that, and you don't get that when you just sat watching it on a laptop in your bedroom, and then you stop to go and make a cup of tea and all that sort of stuff. You can't lose yourself in the film, which is like the whole point of this film as far as Scorsese was concerned.
Yeah. I think it's worth noting though as well, this again, like This Is England that we covered a few weeks back, this is an incredibly formative film for me in terms of my film taste. It's, you know, when you first start getting into movies, certainly as a teenage boy, there's certain films that are kind of flung at you as, oh, well, you've got to see this, and obviously, you know, there's the big hitters like, you know, Star Wars, Citizen Kane, Pulp Fiction, but then, you know, there's also the likes of Taxi Driver. I'd say it's very much up there with the likes of Scarface in terms of films that first year film students will fall in love with and not necessarily understand, and so yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is this is one of the first films, like real classic movies, serious movies, movies without a genre element in it as well, because, you know, I'd probably been watching the likes of American Werewolf in London and Dawn of the Dead and stuff at this point, but like in terms of getting into like quote unquote real cinema, yeah, it was one of the earliest films I remember sitting down to watch. And again, it for me as like a 14-year-old, however old I'll have been, I remember just loving it. And back then I was still watching stuff as pure entertainment. I don't think I was really getting much more out of movies than what I got on a kind of superficial, like, you know, a subconscious reading of it. You know, nowadays I watch a movie and I try and consciously put together my emotions about it and figure out why is this working for me, why is this not working for me, what am I enjoying about this, what am I not enjoying about this, so I can come away and say, oh, you know, I felt the third act was very contrived, that's why I didn't like that film, or I thought this performance was mesmerizing and it carried me through blah 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 blah. With Taxi Driver, I remember just loving it from the first time I put it on, and so I find it interesting that you seem to be approaching it as less a piece of entertainment and more a piece of art. And that's not to say it isn't a piece of art. It seems to work for me as just pure entertainment, and then I can get the art level out of it. What struck me rewatching it, actually, because I was rewatching it thinking, wow, this isn't a conventional crowd-pleasing movie. It's weird that it is held up in circles that might not necessarily get subtext and so on as well. But then obviously we now live in a post-Joker society, and I mean, we spoke about this when we covered Joker on the podcast. Yeah. It's part of what spurred me on to really want to go back and revisit this film, because I probably haven't seen Taxi Driver in about 10 years at this point, honestly. But yeah, I was really struck, because like Joker is just, hey, let's do Taxi Driver in clown makeup. And again, that's that was the big crowd-pleasing movie of last year. That was the big populist film everyone came away loving. So I guess maybe this sort of film does just strike a nerve with men. Yeah,
let's get back to that in terms of the character relatability. But yeah, I was just going to say, this golden age of Hollywood, this kind of movie brat age of Hollywood, was really informed by European cinema, and the fact that Taxi Driver won the Palme d'Or is no kind of real surprise there. It's because it's playing into the things that appeal to that market, and it's that sort of stuff that it was feeding into Hollywood at the time. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest won the Oscar the year before that. You've got things like The Conversation, early Coppola stuff, American Graffiti. It's like that kind of stuff. And the fact that Rocky won the Oscar, obviously Rocky doesn't quite fall into that category, but it's definitely playing on those ideas. The fact that those things had become popular meant that Rocky could get made, low budget, and also meant that it could be kind of critically lauded in a slightly different way. That's not to denigrate Rocky too much, but like I said, I think that Rocky is the kind of the inevitable resolution of this European art style with Hollywood populism. And that's fine. That's okay.
Yeah, I just want to say, if you haven't heard our Rocky 2 episodes, actually, we did, covering the whole franchise, sorry if it sounds like we're shitting all over it today, because I think we were both very positive about it.
Oh yeah, we loved Rocky.
Yeah.
The first one.
If you want to hear us blowing smoke up Rocky's ass, go and listen to episode 100 and whatever it was.
Yeah,
dimreturns.com. Rocky.
All I'm saying is Rocky has more commercial appeal.
Oh, completely. No, I get what you're saying.
With that. I don't think I've quite figured out how I feel about it. Like I say, I definitely feel I respect it more as a piece of art than enjoy it as a piece of film, sort of entertainment, I guess. If you're making a film that's going out into cinemas and not into a art gallery, I suppose there's a certain expectation. But it's a little low-budget film that's obviously much more character-driven, and I think those expectations are not there to make a big mainstream hit that's going to make loads of money. It's painting a relatable character who is also does terrible things. And
well, not only does terrible things, but is actually, to his core, quite an unpleasant person. It's not like, oh, he's a good guy at heart and he's fallen on he's had a bad life and kids just beat him up for no reason when he's dressed as a clown, and they don't pay him and blah 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 blah. He gets fired from being a clown because he was tricked. It's none of that shit. It's like, no, he's actually not nice. He's racist, he's bigoted, he's got a real superiority complex, he's violent. The film's about how that gets channeled, but then there is this flip side, which is that he is just incredibly likable in the way he's got this weird charisma about him. And I think that's something I always found incredibly interesting about this film, and perhaps why I don't think I did understand this film when I first watched it, not fully, because he's presented as this, this creepy loner, but, with no social skills. But as a 15-year-old watching this, or however old I was, it's like, he's got no problem going up and chatting to people, and he goes and has a chat to that Secret Service guy, and it's all a bit weird, but like he's actually quite good at interacting with people. He asks a woman on a date. She finds, and this is the thing, it's not just me misinterpreting this film. I think you're meant to find him likable and charismatic because she finds something in there. She's a bit like, right, there's something a bit off about this guy, but there's a bit of mystery here. I want to know more. And she gets to know more and goes, oh shit, no, let's back the fuck off, never mind. But there's obviously something about him that is very likable and And I suppose
that's very interesting. I think that you think that, and I suspect now we're going to find why we have different takes on this film, because I do not find him likable at all or charming. I find him quite cringy, and kind of I feel very awkward watching him. I'm just always on edge, waiting for him to do something or say something. And I think that's deliberate. I think that's a deliberate.
Well, no,
thing
I agree. I get what you just said, and I agree. He comes across weird and cringy when he's talking to people in a way where it's like he's doing what he wants to do. You know, it's not like Joker where it's like, oh, this man is coming up to me in the street and I've just got to kind of humor him. It's more like this weird guy on...
But no, I think you're right. I think the fact that we're looking at the same thing...
I think it's about confidence. That's the point I'm trying to get at. He's got the confidence in what he's doing. He's doing what he wants to do. It's like a sense of he doesn't really care how it comes across. Whereas you watch other films like this, you know, normally you watch a film about a creepy loser left behind from society, and it feels out of their hands, and like they want to be part of society, but they can't. Whereas here it always feels a bit more like Travis is just, I don't know, detached, not interested in really conforming.
But I think that's a testament to the character that has been created here by the writer or through Robert De Niro or the director, whoever. The whole thing comes together to create this character that can be read in different ways because of the way you're approaching it as a viewer, but also is subtle and is grey, and it is... That's kind of the point, because ultimately what we have is this man who's lauded as a hero when just like a flip of a coin could have gone down as an assassin, you know. And I think when we'll get to this with the ending, but that's raising questions about society in terms of like, you kill the right person, you're a success. You kill the wrong person, and you're not.
I mean, I think that's the entire point of the film, really, and it's, you know. Talking about Paul Schrader, the writer, I haven't seen much of his work. I think I slagged him off a bit unfairly in a previous episode, in fact. I get the impression that he's kind of been returning to this film throughout his career and writing different versions of the same film. Because I watched First Reformed a few weeks ago. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
No, I don't think so.
Well, I didn't know what to expect from it. I knew it was this drama about Ethan Hawke playing a priest, written and directed by the guy who did Taxi Driver, but it's essentially the same film. I mean, not to give too much away, but First Reformed, I'm getting into mild spoiler territory here, but this is really the inciting incident, so it's, you know, it's the setup of the film. Basically, First Reformed is about a priest who feels shunned by society, is turning his back on society, and he starts to question whether or not he wants to commit a terrorist act with a bomb and blowing himself up. And, you know, it's Taxi Driver with a priest. Mm-hmm. And that's like, it's the exact same thing. And both films, I found it incredibly interesting watching Taxi Driver again from a more adult perspective, from a contemporary perspective. I mean, it is just, you know, if he were a Muslim, it would play more or less the same, but it'd be a very different film. But he is
culturally, in terms of the way it's taken.
But like, it's essentially, you know, this is essentially a film about a person being radicalized in one form or another and turned into a terrorist. It's interesting to watch it from a modern perspective, I think, just with all of that.
Well, I think with Taxi Driver, obviously he's a Vietnam veteran. He's served in the Marines. I don't think it's saying, hey, we're going to write a story about a guy with PTSD. I think it's writing a story about Vietnam veterans and kind of the lost souls that came back from Vietnam, and how some of them, you know, just had nowhere to go. And I think by looking at those people and going, oh, I'm going to write someone like that, you are inevitably dealing with PTSD.
Oh, God, of course, yeah. You know what I found really jarring, actually? Last time I watched this film, Travis Bickle was very much a grown-up, an adult. He's younger than I am now, and I wasn't really prepared for that. It was like, oh shit, fucking hell.
And that's another thing. I do feel like I'm suffering, certainly watching this film, from being far removed from its place and time. I can't really. I'm not a young man watching this relating to, oh yeah, well, I remember my time in Vietnam, yeah. Or even culturally being aware of that, really, in terms of, going on around me.
But I think, that is a catalyst for social isolation and detachment and quarter life crisis and all these different things that, they largely all stem from the same emotional pool. I think it's very easy. Personally, I've always found this film, and maybe this is why it works so well for me, I found it very easy to put myself in the role of Travis in a sort of empathetic sense. I don't think I'm the creep as presented. I'm certainly not someone who's prone to violence and obsession in that way, but I've always found it very easy to just, on a human level, connect with him. But I don't know, it sounds like maybe that's not the case for you.
I definitely think watching it this time around, I'm looking back, like you said, you now you're aged through it. And I'm only 35, and I'm certainly not, like, socially mature for my age either. You know what I mean? I'm not, like, married and with kids or anything like that. And I can definitely identify with being kind of a drifter and not knowing what you're doing with your life, but not in the same way. And I think as a teenage boy, or, like, if you're 18, early 20s, whatever, I think you're going to find more in this because there's a greater sense of social isolation, social awkwardness. Yeah. I think by my age, and like you're saying, he's very confident, but there's still this social awkwardness. It's not a simple, because it's not a simple character. Yeah. So it's not a simple, like, dude, I can't talk to girls, and so I'm lonely. Yeah. I'm going to go into the internet and bitch about films. It's much more subtle than that. He's a functioning person, but he's just a bit off, and I think this reminds me much more of watching documentaries about serial killers and stuff that. That is definitely deliberate.
Oh, completely. There's a lot of that in there, yeah.
Not necessarily even serial killers, but, those people who just obsess about Jodie Foster and then go and shoot Ronald Reagan,
Well, I mean, you're referencing the man who was famously partly driven by Taxi Driver to attempt a presidential assassination himself, in a sort of half copycat crime, but arguably, that's the way his waters were turning regardless.
Yeah, I mean, that's you have to be going that way.
Yeah. But it's interesting, I read last night that Robert De Niro actually studied somewhat and based a lot of the performance on another man who sounds very similar, who attempted a presidential assassination years prior on a different presidential candidate.
This was, I assume what you're talking about is the same thing I was reading about, where Paul Schrader based essentially the sort of primary source for the film, a guy who was wanted to shoot Nixon, but then the security was too tight, so he shot another guy who was like a Democratic candidate for the primary. Didn't care about the politics or anything like that. He just wanted to kind of become infamous. His diaries were published. They found them and they published them, and that's why Taxi Driver is, he's writing in his diary all the time. And Paul Schrader, that was his kind of primary source in terms of like, oh, that's a good idea, that's make a good, interesting story. So that's like the story, the true story, if he actually did go and shoot the senator and ended up putting him in a wheelchair. And then, that guy spent 30 years in prison and now he's out.
Are you talking about Arthur Bremer?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I'm just reading here. He attempted to assassinate US Democratic presidential candidate George Wallace, specifically. Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting, because what I read is that De Niro listened to recordings of the man as a big part of preparing for the role and getting into it. So his performance was obviously somewhat based on him. I didn't realise Paul Schrader based the script on him as well, but yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Well, I assume it's the same guy, yeah. But like I say, this guy wrote in his diaries, and like kind of like your classic in films, I'm a mental person writing in diaries, talking about my plans to assassinate the president. And, it's because he's all about like, oh, I'm going to kill the president, and then I'm going to be like totally famous, and it's going to be amazing. And then he's like, oh, I can't kill the president, it's too hard. I'll just kill this other bloke. I definitely won't be as good, but it'll be all right. And then nobody remembers him.
Well, they do now as the inspiration behind Taxi Driver. Should we take a break from talking about this film on a deeper thematic level and touch on some of the more superficial elements, the sort of technical stuff?
Yep.
Okay, so cinematography. I think this film is really quite beautiful to look at, but I don't know how much of that is just that they kind of perfectly captured a place and time that is so alien to me. But you know, there's a New York in the 70s is famously a shithole, but it's a shithole that's also very romanticized. It's a really great setting for a film, and I can't think of a film that really takes me there and makes me feel like I'm there to the extent that Taxi Driver does, with just all the, I don't know, all the shots of just driving around and you see the reflections in the mirror, and it's a very innovative, I suppose, interesting way of shooting a film. It's put together with a really kind of, I mean, you can just, it's what you were saying earlier, you can tell this is a really good director calling the shots.
Yeah, everything is chosen. It's not just like, well, what will make a good shot? It's like, what will this shot mean? What
That's
will
it.
this shot say?
There's a lot of really nice, fancy shots dotted around, but they're never just like, "Ooh, that's a good shot." It's always like, well, here's something we can read into this shot, or this shot is going to convey some sense of character, or, you know, it's all done with purpose.
Yeah, and so everything right down to, like, you know, when you're seeing his eyes in the rearview mirror, that's saying something, you know, and when you're seeing him talking directly to the camera because he's actually looking at his reflection, and he's saying, "You're talking to me," you know, that works. Even though he's looking directly at the camera, it doesn't feel like he's breaking the fourth wall. It just feels like he's in his own head there, and it's, let's not forget, very low budget. You know, you're going to be very limited in terms of your lighting choices, and like you say, your equipment you've got.
That's something I wanted to say, is that, you know, I think it's got a very muted, almost sepia kind of colour palette. It's lots of browns and greys. It's quite a drab looking film, but I think it's really beautiful colour palette. But I don't know how much of that is just that 1970s film stock has this kind of dreamlike quality to it for me.
Well, I think Scorsese said that he was attempting to make something dream-like, so I don't think that's accidental at all. I think there's a definite choice there. And also this
film just has a hazy feel of, like, it's the same sensation I get of, like, falling asleep, having a nap in the back of a car, which, you know, for me is a pleasant experience. I like having a sleep in a moving vehicle, but it's that kind of a hazy, drifting in and out of reality kind of vibe.
It's like you say about capturing New York, isn't it? It's you know, it's a dirty city, New York, in the 70s, and that comes across on film, not just in the fact that it's actually kind of, they're shooting on real streets in New York, like I say, it was all low budget, you're shooting where you can. There was a strike on at the time, so the rubbish wasn't getting collected, and so the streets are just dirtier than normal. There was a heat wave on. It's got all that in it, even though it's not sort of the point of it. It's all just there, and you've got, obviously, you got De Niro at the center of it, completely committed to his character. So it doesn't feel like an outsider in a set. It feels like he's part of it as well. I mean, the sort of thing I kept coming back to was that I kept likening this to a poem. You know, for all the straightforward narrative elements, there's lots more going on, and it's often, in the same way with poetry, it's often impenetrable and tedious and annoying. But it's all there. And it's like, just for example, there's a moment where, you know, he drops his soluble aspirin in a glass of water, and then there's a sort of slow zoom to this effervescing glass of water, and it's just like, all right, come on. Just get on with it.
I know what you're saying, but it doesn't really work for me because I don't like poems. It's just an unfinished song. Put some fucking music over it and finish what you started, you lazy.
But that's it. I mean, I've never got on with poetry very well, but then there's certain things that will jump out at you and go, okay, that's great. I feel like I understand what it's doing now. But I think this is what we're dealing with here in this film. It's the artistic end of the film spectrum, certainly the mainstream film spectrum. And there's moments like that where I'm just like going, oh God, like come on, I want this to be like pacier and and there's so much of it that feels inconsequential, like everything to do with Albert Brooks's character just feels like it doesn't need to be there, or it just her friend in the office is like that's plenty,
I guess you are right when it comes to Albert Brooks. He's like a weird little bit of comic relief dotted in there almost, but I suppose maybe he's there just to show the counterbalance to Travis Bickle. Albert Brooks is playing a character who is the cookie cutter example of what society says a man should be, and Travis obviously isn't that, and they both have obvious shortcomings in their own way. I think he's there to provide an interesting contrast, but you're right, he is perhaps the least consequential part of this film. I can't really think of anything else though that I would.
Well, there's the bits where he's talking to his fellow taxi drivers.
Yeah, I think it's all
that all just feels like stretched out, and it's just like I don't care. And I think it's the point of that.
Well, the entire film's just a character study, isn't it? I think everything like that is developing his character, and it is. It's not just they're not just chatting to fill time. Like they are talking in ways that furthers his worldview, or at least our understanding of his worldview.
Yeah, and it's not very direct, and I think that's okay. But I think because the whole film in general is not very direct, and perhaps it is just a matter of personal taste as well, that I feel like, let's get to the point here, let's focus a little bit. And that's not what the film's trying to do. I mean, it's definitely not. So it's not a failing, but it's just something that frustrates me.
I love that he picks up Marty in the back seat, and Martin Scorsese has his cameo just, complaining about his wife and black people and all sorts, goes off on a tirade. And, it's on one hand, you can argue it's an incredibly inconsequential scene, but on the other hand, it's one of the most important scenes in the film. It cements Travis Bickle's views on the world that you can see taking shape. And I think that is arguably the scene that pushes him to take violent action.
Well, that's it. I think what happens is he's listening to that and goes, "Oh, I'm not the only one."
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe I'm not so mental after all.
Yeah, I'd say he's a better actor than Tarantino.
Like if I say it's a character, I can say whatever I want.
Yeah. Oh, he's having too much fun saying this stuff.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's it.
It's like when remember that film I made at uni, Alan?
Yeah.
When the first AD, it was set in a it was about a stand-up comedian, so there were a load of scenes set during a kind of comedy night with a compere. And the first AD came to me one day and was like, "Yeah, I was just thinking, like, on the day, like, I should just play it, like, in character when I'm first ADing." For anyone listening who doesn't know, the first AD is kind of the first assistant director. It's someone who basically is
managing the crew,
organising. Yeah, they're kind of, they're the person saying, you have to be here at this time, you have to do this. They're like logistics. So he was there like, yeah, I just, I was just thinking, like, if I do it in character and I go up on the microphone and I do some bad jokes and then, I can kind of like organise everyone like as the compere, and I was like, yeah, whatever, mate, like, do what you want. But it was so blatantly like, oh, he just wants to dress up and be, a comedian with a silly hat on, and it was like, just fucking come out and say it. Like, it's fine. Like, there's merit to what you're suggesting, but don't pretend it's because it's the best way to do your job. And then he spent ages trying to get a beanie hat because he was talking about how everyone who wears a beanie hat looks like a cunt, which is true, to be honest. And I think we ultimately ended up borrowing Calvin's. Calvin's fans may not realise, because I don't think he wears them on his social media. I don't know if he even wears them anymore in real life, but he probably does.
It's a young man's
But
game,
Calvin certainly went through a beanie hat phase where he was, he loved his little beanie hat.
Anyway, back to the topic in hand. Yeah, so let's deal with the plot elements a little bit. We introduce Travis Bickle as a character. We basically get quite a nice, quick history without it feeling too exposition heavy. That he's come back from Vietnam, he's serving the Marines, and now he hasn't got a job.
You know what's interesting is that I normally hate narration, because you're taught as a film student, certainly you're taught that narration is a lazy way of doing exposition, and there's truth to that. Show don't tell, that's what the rule is. Film's a visual medium and all that, so it's weird because I love it here, but I think it's kind of what you were saying, like he's indirect, isn't he? Like the exposition he's spouting isn't. Yeah,
it's not like the voiceover goes, well, I started out in 1958. Yeah. I got a job doing. It's like
God, I hate these people.
Well, the beauty of it, and the reason why it works, is because what we're getting is his inner monologue. We're hearing his thoughts, basically. But he's not doing what he's doing consciously. He's not thinking, I'm going to go from A to B and then I'm going to reach C. He's all over the place as well. He doesn't really know why he's doing it. And it's what creates the ambiguity of the film and why it's so great. He, as a character, doesn't fully understand what he's doing or the motivations behind what he's doing. And also, you also get a sense of that he's writing these diaries to be found one day. And it's going to be this manifesto.
But that is it. It doesn't feel like an honest diary in the way that like Samuel Pepys or whoever was. It feels like I'm presenting my what I view as my best self in these pages.
Yeah.
So I think that's very revealing. You get a lot more.
There's a couple of moments in the narration, and I'm going to put this to the director's benefit, I assume, where he starts and then stops and starts a sentence again.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I love those moments,
now, I don't know if that came about because De Niro stopped and started again and they thought, oh, that's good, I'm going to use that. But basically the impression it gives is that it's a man rehearsing his manifesto, kind of rehearsing this speech that he's going to give when finally everyone's looking at him, the press are looking at him and say, why did you do this? And he's finally going to be able to get his say.
Listen up, all you scumbags, lowlifes. I remember in primary school, for an English lesson, we were told to write an official notice to go up on like a communal board or something saying, please don't litter in the park. And for whatever reason, I went away. My teacher had a talk with me saying, now the tone of voice in this is it's quite aggressive. Because I wrote, I can't remember it exactly, but I remember for a fact that the first two words I'm about to say were the words I used. Attention, scumbags. And I remember my friend who sits next to me read it and loved it so much that he wrote like the same thing. Like, listen up, scumbags, stop dropping litter. Oh, God.
So let's get to some plot points. He starts driving a taxi, he's an insomniac. We never quite develop that aspect of it, but it's just yet another thing that's creating this fractured state of mind and perhaps hinting at PTSD or something like that.
So yeah, what's he doing? He decides to become a taxi driver just because it's a pretty solid gig in the 70s.
It means he sees driving around New York at night, he sees the seedy underbelly, he's seeing the worst of the place.
Hey Alan, if they made this movie now, they'd have to call it Uber Driver.
Yeah.
And every scene would be the same, wouldn't it? But at the end, Robert De Niro would be, I'm going to give you 5 stars. Really squint at them.
Yeah. Any other weak comic observations you'd like to get?
If they made this film now, probably wouldn't even be able to drive anywhere. Because New York's so congested, isn't it? Have I ever been to New York? I don't think... Or if they made it now, he'd probably run over Jimmy Kimmel or Conan O'Brien or someone, wouldn't he?
So
James Corden doing cut. Oh no, he does it in LA though, doesn't he? Doesn't it? Damn it! I was thinking up a carpool karaoke Taxi Driver mashup, but what a film! If this film ended with Robert De Niro shooting James Corden in the face. Sorry, I mean we're getting massively.
No, there's got to be some ambiguity if he might be a bad person. Because shooting someone in the face who's raping a child is one thing, but there's ambiguity to that. But James Corden, everyone's on board.
I think where James Corden's on the brain, before we started filming, I just saw from about a year ago, the Late Late Show team, James Corden and, I don't know, some writers and a producer all did one of the Reddit Ask Me Anything threads. Q&A, and I encourage anyone listening to this to go and look it up, because on Reddit you rate up posts or rate them down, and so at the top you see all the highest rated posts. I couldn't see any that actually got an answer from the team until I set it specifically to show me their responses, because the highest rated posts are just basically just loads of questions along the lines of, "Hi James, what's it like being such an insufferable piece of shit?" It's remarkable. And we're doing questions followed by edit. The team have had to go and work on the show, so that's the end of the questions. And it's like, I think they might have cut this short.
Yeah, so he focuses in on Sybil Shepherd, just a young woman who's caught his eye.
Yes.
For apparently purely aesthetic reasons, because he's never spoken to her, and so he watches her from afar from a while, and in a creepy way she notices, and then he feels confident enough to go and ask her out, and pretty much just goes in sort of the pretense of a reason to be there, and then he's just like, actually, do you know what, I just want to ask you out. Yeah, she seems to respond to that in a kind of like, this is a quirky kind of guy, I'll go for a piece of pie with him, and we'll see what happens.
But that's it, because I think he is an interesting guy. I get that.
Yeah, obviously what she's seeing in this scene is not what we've seen so far, and yeah, he's a fairly attractive young man. He's just sort of walked in with a bit of confidence, and that's all you need, isn't it?
He's an enigmatic character. There's a lot to unpack there, and then she starts to unpack it. Yeah,
you definitely get the sense that she's curious about him, like, rather than really horny for him,
You always get the sense that she's kind of on edge from the get-go and ready to end the date then and there if it kind of...
Which she does, ultimately.
Oh, we've all been there, haven't we, Alan?
What, taking a girl to a porno theatre?
What's the quickest date you've ever had?
What, from beginning to failure?
Well, I mean, if you sealed the deal sooner than the failure, then that counts, I guess. I mean, like an actual date.
I don't think I've ever had a bad date in the sense of like you turn up and then just like, oh god, this is not for me. I need to get out as soon as possible. I've always been able to have a decent conversation out of it, even if nothing came of it. It's always been like, that's fine. Spend a couple of hours having a drink and a chat. That's fine.
Well, I've had that. Yeah, I've never had like an abrupt ew and then they walk away sort of thing. But I've been on. Most dates I've had have been pretty successful from my point of view. Even if I'm not really into it, they come away like falling in love with me. It's just something that happens. but
the interesting thing about this whole thing is that he does okay over coffee and pie, and she goes for a second date, a little bit more kind of, let's go out in the evening time, and he takes her to a porno theatre. Already, like, obviously, we don't have much frame of reference for porno theatres. It's just not a thing that exists anymore. What I noticed, we see him going there earlier, an earlier scene, and he buys popcorn and like sweets and a drink, and I'm like, that was really surprising. I wouldn't have thought porno theaters. You just sat there with popcorn and stuff.
Well, it's the 70s.
Especially it's a
you look. You pay your money. You're there for an hour and a half or whatever. So you're gonna want to crank at least 3 out to make it worth your while. Like you're either going in.
I haven't got that kind of energy.
You're gonna go in, sort yourself out and immediately leave, which is what I bet a lot of people did, most people.
Yeah.
Or you're actually going to watch the movie.
In which case you're pacing yourself to the last 10
Yeah, which
minutes.
is what I bet a lot of people did as well, because they're paying probably decent money to go and see this film, and there's a time expense as well of just going out of the house to a porno theatre to watch it. So I bet you a lot of people were like, right, I'm in for the long haul here. I'm going to watch... Sort myself out right at the start and then have one at the end. And so I bet you would arm yourself with like milk duds and popcorn and a drink to keep yourself going.
That'd put me off though. If I was trying to crack one out and there's some bloke sat next to me
with a popcorn
I don't know
rustling,
if you could settle in. And did you know Sol, he at the porno theatre he tries to sort of flirt with the woman at the desk.
Yeah.
And she's just having none of it.
Well, that's because she gets that all the time. That's why.
That's it. Because even in that scene, he's not like he's really kind of weird and creepy. He's just making a move and then doesn't quite get the hint that it's not happening, mate. And he tries again, and she has to sort of like really reject him properly. But that was Robert De Niro's first wife.
Oh, really? Really?
I don't think they were married at the time, but it was like his on again, off again girlfriend at the time.
Oh, interesting.
Diane Abbott, she's called.
Yeah, top.
Not the MP.
Top billed.
Yeah, alphabetically.
Spelt incorrectly as well. They missed the second T off her surname. Which is weird, because if I was going to misspell Diane Abbott, it would be that fucking car crash of a Diane. Diahnne. What the fuck is that?
Diane. Little bit trivia for you there.
Yeah, I had no idea.
We've established the porno theatre, although the one he takes her to is a bigger, classier one. But the interesting thing about that scene is that you never get a sense that he's trying to shock her or test her or something like that. It feels like he really doesn't get it, that's a weird thing to do.
It is by far and away, I think, the weirdest behaviour exhibited from him. The most clear-cut, this guy's a bit not right, that you get in the entire film. Because even his violent tendencies, it's like, okay, I understand the logic behind this. Even if it's just, I want attention, I can see how this might equate to attention. But, it's difficult to know what he was trying to achieve, basically, is I suppose, what... and I guess what it comes down to is this is something he does himself as a nice way to spend time. So he just thinks that that's what everyone does, right? Because you're right, it's not like he takes her there to test the... I think if porno theatres were still knocking around, I might have had a date or two at one. I feel like it's... But it'd be a bit of a laugh,
Yeah, but you would definitely establish it beforehand. You would make sure they were up.
But that's it, I had a first date to a rope bondage class once, and... it was very much... she was going anyway, and she just sort of said, like, well, you might as well. I had this booked in for Friday night, but whatever. And I should add, it was kind of a surprise thing. She didn't tell me what it was going to be till, like, we got there, basically. That was obviously a kind of playful, I'm going to test this guy's boundaries and reactions a bit and see...
And presumably, based on conversations you had, she knew that wasn't just total punt in the dark.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think...
Based on what had come across from you. Plus, a woman doing that to a man is very different.
Yeah, that is very true. That is very true. But I guess what I'm saying is I think a date to a porno theatre in the right context could be... she even responds this way herself in the film. She kind of hints at, like, ooh, cheeky, as if, like, that's how she's supposed to react to it. And then he just doesn't pick up on that hint from her.
I mean, she gets in there. She doesn't get to the door and go, I'm not doing this. She's like, are you sure this is what we're doing?
Yeah.
And he, because he reassures her, she's like, okay, well, all right. And then very quickly kind of, no, this is exactly what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
So there isn't some sort of subtlety here I'm not aware of.
Yeah. It's a very weird scene, but I think it's the most difficult scene in the film to unpack, just in terms of meaning. But I love it. I think there's a lot to read into it.
And also, this is the rejection by her that I think we're supposed to see from his point of view as a kind of last chance at normality, I suppose, or last chance at real life, because there's nothing holding him. He can just descend into his whatever he wants, whatever kind of weird world he's in his head.
Yeah, because it's shortly after this that he goes and buys a weapons arsenal.
Yeah,
and oh god, I love that scene. This is the thing. I just find every scene in this film so inherently just watchable, just mesmerizingly entertaining. And it's very similar. I keep going on about This Is England, but it's very similar to what I got out of that. And it's very similar to what I got out of the likes of Breaking Bad. Just effortlessly entertaining stuff. And it's just people talking, but I just find them so well directed and well performed, I suppose. Because that scene with the gun salesman, I love it. To be honest, in hindsight, you probably could get away with cutting that scene. I don't think it would make much difference to the overall narrative. But then there's so many subtle bits of characterization in there where, well, firstly, he's completely unhinged. He goes to buy one gun, he buys all the guns, completely overdoing it, unnecessary. But secondly, the guy then goes, oh, this guy wants to buy shit. Maybe he wants to buy some drugs. And Travis responds with just complete disdain, like, no, drugs are for lowlife scumbags. Like, he's obviously not interested in that at all. So you get all this weird moral code that he is projecting upon the world.
How do you think you'd react if Joe Gilgan took you to a porno theatre on a first date?
I think I'd be like, are you joking? Kind of like she was. And if he was like, nah, come on, it'll be Sterling, mate, Sterling, I'd be like, all right. And I think if I got in there and it was just like he took his trousers down and started wanking himself off, I think I would be quite upset because it would be like a betrayal. But I don't know. I don't think he'd ever frame it that way. I think it would.
It'd be cheeky fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's it. It would just be cheeky, cheerful chappy having a laugh. It'd be like, what, a porn theatre? This is. But then it's hard. Again, it's also very difficult to view this objectively, isn't it? Because to us, porn theatre, there's a novelty there. We don't have these things anymore. It's not a day-to-day thing. I suppose the modern-day equivalent would be if Travis Bickle invited her in for coffee and she came in, and then he loaded up Pornhub on his laptop and sat down to watch some of that with her, as if or like put it up on the TV.
Just in the background.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's kind of the modern equivalent, isn't it? And, I think it would play much the same way, that she'd sort of be immediately like, are you joking? And then he'd be like, no. And she'd be like, and then she'd probably take a second for it to sink in. And actually, no, she'd probably just immediately be like, what the fuck, and leave. But
yeah, of course, the slight difference there is when they're in this porno theatre, they are essentially still in public place. So she probably doesn't feel as kind of afraid in that sense. She feels she can still walk away, which she does. Yeah, so then we start to see Travis descend further into his own kind of isolation, and it feels like that's an important thing. There's a lot of ideas of him being alone and isolated, and how much of that is deliberate from his part. And
he doesn't socialise at all beyond picking up people as part of his work.
And that's the crucial thing about it being a taxi driver, because, the taxi driver is present but not present, because you talk in a taxi, you're just having a conversation between yourselves, and there's someone else there, but they're just nothing. You're not paying attention to them.
And I think quite interestingly, really, because I think the impulse making a film about a taxi driver would be you write a whole load of scenes where the character has a great chat because everyone's been in a taxi and they've had like a really enthusiastic taxi driver, or you've been there with I'm not someone to spark up a big conversation, but I've been in taxis with people who then spark up a massive conversation with a taxi driver, or I've kind of politely gone along with a massive conversation with a taxi driver and just,
I can't imagine anything I want less than a conversation with a taxi driver.
Oh god, I've had full on. I've had a taxi driver trying to convert me to Allah's beautiful love. he somehow, I think he somehow picked up that like I wasn't a Muslim hating racist, and then very quickly that transitioned into trying to convert me, and it was like, okay, I'll give him 4 stars instead of 5. Can never bring myself to go too low on the old Uber there. It's a livelihood, isn't it, you're fucking about with?
Yeah, they got to do something wrong, haven't they? If you wanna...
Yeah, they've got to like drive me to a porno theatre when I'm trying to go somewhere else. I think there's an impulse, or there would be an impulse, to write that, you know, always having all this banter and connections with these people, and you don't really get any of that. And maybe that's
the whole point, is that he's not connecting with people.
There's a scene with Marty, but it's very much Martin Scorsese talking at him. There's not much interaction. The one scene he kind of does have a back and forth is the political candidate gets in his taxi and he has a chat, but even that's very insincere and
yeah, that's an interesting scene because Travis it talks to the Senator Palpatine, I think he's called. He talks to the Senator
Palantine,
and the way he speaks and the way he's smiling, something, it's like, oh, we've never seen him like that before. That's weird. It feels false. It feels like everything he's saying is a lie. And then, of course, that's mirrored by the politician who gives a total politician's response as completely insincere.
There's a lot of ways to read it. I certainly don't have a solid grip on this scene as to how you're meant to take it, like I do with much of this film. But I think the idea there is that he's kind of, in the moment, he kind of does believe it, is kind of how I see it.
And he does have the campaign stickers and stuff in his flat, but no one else is going to go. He's not going to see them. It's not performative.
It feels like he's for a brief moment, he does love this guy and his policies without really understanding politics, because this girl he was into is involved with this guy's work, and he's seen this guy around. And
that's it. It feels like. It feels like not someone who's going, oh, hey, I really like what you're standing for, and I really... It feels like someone who's heard people say that and knows that's what you're supposed to say.
Exactly, yeah,
and can perform it, but doesn't really... not really believe it, but he just doesn't understand it in any real sense. He's performing social normities.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what it adds to his character particularly. But...
Well, if nothing else, I think it does show that he's very capable of switching on a charm and being part of society on a kind of, it reinforces the idea that it's a choice that he's making to kind of remove himself from socialization, and rather than it being thrust upon him. And yeah, I think it also reinforces more than anything the notion that he doesn't follow politics. You might read it when he later attempts to assassinate the guy, you might read it as being politically motivated, but I think this scene really helps to push the idea that, oh no, he doesn't understand. This isn't about politics, it's about something else. It's about fame and recognition.
Yeah, and I think the reason he chose this guy is because of Sybil Shepherd, but I don't think there's any kind of like, oh, she's rejected me, I'm going to kill her boss or anything like that. It feels just like...
Oh, no, it's just familiarity.
Oh, that's in my frame of reference, so yeah, that'll do.
But that people are like that. People are like that,
And there might be some sense of this'll make her look at me, this'll make her pay attention to me kind of thing, but even that's played down. But then, of course, we have the secondary element of the story, which is a girl played by Jodie Foster, whose name is Iris, and she is a child prostitute who's just a streetwalker in New York, basically.
Jodie Foster was 12 when they shot this, I believe. She's been trafficked, I guess. Is that the word? Just by these pimps. We're introduced to her, I should add, in a scene where she shows great distress and she's trying to flee from these people. I think that's important to note. It's not like he just spots her on the street one day.
She's literally walking around on the streets as a prostitute. Like, people will see her every day and are aware, and she looks young. And I know these things still happen, but it is... I don't know if that sort of stuff does happen as easily in the fucking streets of New York, you know what I mean?
So you're right, actually, yeah. I was going to say, it was... I think it was very controversial at the time of this film's release that a 12-year-old had been cast in that role and was involved in such a movie and all that sort of thing. But you're right, the fact that we're supposed to buy that she walks around in broad daylight and the police and protective services don't come in and put a stop to it is quite... Yeah, that is different. I don't think that would play today.
That seems to be an accepted norm of the film anyway.
To be honest, it seems more like the controversy was around her being present in the violent shootout at the end rather than her playing a prostitute. So that's probably says a lot about the time. Yeah. I mean, God, lest we forget, when was NAMBLA a thing? People openly, I think in the 70s, wasn't it? People used to get away with openly campaigning for the legalization of sex with minors. And so, I mean, it was a different time because, if people come out publicly as being paedophiles now, they'll be chased out of society, they'll get bricks through their windows and things.
Yeah, and there's no sense in this film that this 12-year-old prostitute is being worked to a kind of niche market of paedophiles. She's just a prostitute. It's just a woman who to fuck. And it's very dehumanizing in that sense, but her age is not really that relevant. The fact that she's an innocent in that sense is obviously lesser than it would be now. And
I suppose there's also an element that if she were an adult, the audience might read it as, is he infatuated with this woman and that's why he's going in to save her, which is not what this is. It's very much an attempt at righteousness, correcting a wrong that he sees, which is absolutely a wrong. He's looking to go out and cause trouble, essentially. The reasons that lead him there are perhaps questionable. Yeah, we have a scene before the big shootout. We have a scene where he kills someone for the first time that we, see. Certainly the first time outside of wartime military capacity.
Yeah. But the really interesting about this scene is basically he's in a grocery store, someone holds it up and he shoots the bad guy.
Having just bought his arsenal of weapons, and I think at this point he's been playing around with them and in his flat and doing the iconic "Are you talking to me?" line and everything.
Because it's such an important moment. It's the moment where he crosses the line.
Yeah.
And does it in such a way that is vindicated by the situation and kind of justifies it. Like, oh yeah, you can kill a bad guy and then there's no consequences. Or what little consequences there were like the guy going, oh yeah, you did well, don't worry, I'll take care of this. But also it goes to...
Well, not just that, all of that, and then that shopkeeper proceeds to beating the shit out the guy and spouting...
Yeah, it really demonstrates the cheapness of life, I guess.
Spouting racial slurs at him, which further, much like Martin Scorsese's character, further expresses the idea that other people feel the same way as he does, which I think is important as well.
Oh, just on that note, the pimp character, Harvey Keitel, and all the guys he kills at the end were originally written as black guys, and it was Scorsese who decided to change that. And I think for the right decision, he didn't want to make it too much about race, because otherwise it focuses it where it's supposed to be not focused.
Yeah, if the film had ended with Travis going in and gunning down a load of black people, then suddenly you've got a very different film on your hands, and it might ultimately be making the same points, but it's just it's different territory you're getting into. Resident Evil 5, Alan, I don't know if you're aware of the game, is an incredibly controversial entry in the series, because Resident Evil 4 was set in a generic fictional European town, which has been taken over by this zombie parasite, and you go in and you gun down wave after wave of European villagers, but the important thing there is they are white, so it's okay, even though they're clearly impoverished. But then Resident Evil 5 was set in Africa, I imagine in a fictionalized country, although it might have been a specific one, I don't remember, which means that all of a sudden you are gunning down wave after wave of infected black villagers. this was a huge controversy in America because that country is so racially charged. It's a Japanese game. The developers were just like, wait, what, sorry, like, why is this an issue? Because they just don't have that cultural white black divide.
It's set in an area where everyone's black, so all the characters are black.
Yeah, and I think even in the UK, I played the game and it didn't bother me at all. And I say this with a certain degree of white privilege, obviously, but you one of the characters, one of the heroes on the journey is black as well, because she's local. But, I've heard Americans talk about it, and it usually comes down to just you are playing with some very potent imagery there that you do not want to touch unless you're saying something important about it. It's like you don't just passively make a 9/11 joke offhand. You like, if you're going to do it, fine, but...
commit to it.
Yeah, like, you have to... there has to be reason and purpose. And so I think Scorsese just very wisely saw that, because you would read the film very differently. It's easier to understand how Travis can be hailed as a hero because you can kind of buy into it yourself on some level, because he has liberated this exploited child and freed her and done a good thing from a certain perspective. But if they're black and, he is set up, certainly implicitly, as a racist throughout the film, then suddenly you've got this racially charged attack on a load of black people, and it's hard to take his side with that. And, if he was still hailed as a hero, maybe the film would be even more cynically sardonic at the end. Maybe, to be honest, the message would work more. But I think it's important that we can kind of empathize with Travis from start to finish, and it's just... at the end, it is like, okay, you can kind of see he's done a good thing, but he's arrived at it for the wrong reasons, which I think is more interesting, isn't it? But yeah, it's very interesting, and I think you're right. If nothing else, I just think it would be a very distracting aspect of the film that Scorsese removed because he didn't want to confuse the points being made.
Yeah.
We haven't really touched on the ending there, other than to say the original intent for it. But yeah, he does go in and shoot up all the pimps looking after Iris.
And, and importantly, he does that because his attempt to kill the senator fails.
Oh yeah, we've missed that out. He makes a very haphazard attempt to kill the senator, to assassinate him in public during one of his rallies. And he is spotted as a guy with a gun by a Secret Service guy, and just
much immediately
runs away, and it's
all so early that he hasn't got close enough that he can't get away.
Yeah,
so he runs away. Yeah, and then it's just like his plan B, because the plan seems to be to rescue Iris by sending her enough money to get away. Again, like what I was saying about this being based on a real guy who wanted to kill the president and couldn't, so he just killed someone who was a bit less famous. Similar sort of thing, concept to that, in which this grand plan has failed. But in this case, in this fictional case, his backup plan ends up having remarkably positive consequences for him in terms of how he is perceived, I guess.
He's hailed as a hero not only by the media and the general public, but Iris's parents and family, view him as the man who saved their daughter, and arguably that's right. You can argue that it's not violence isn't justified or whatever, but he's ultimately saved a child from a horrible life, but he's kind of arrived at that point by accident. And so the film's point, really, or the satire of it, is, the comment on our nature with the media and violence and things like that, and a satire of how, like you say, how much of a flip of a coin it was, whether he did something and was lauded for it, or did the exact same thing but with a couple of tweaks, and it was a horrible atrocity. But I think importantly, and certainly in line with what Paul Schrader and Martin Scorsese have said, Travis is a ticking time bomb, and he's just going to go and do something else in a few months' time, and next time he won't be hailed as a hero. Next time he'll get gunned down, and that'll be the end of it. And I think it's interesting because I don't know if you are aware, but Robert De Niro has expressed at points in his life a desire to do a sequel to this film and to revisit Travis Bickle in old age. Quite rightly, I think Paul Schrader's always shot it down and said, there is no Travis Bickle in old age. He's dead. He got himself killed like 2 months after the film finished.
And the thing is, he wouldn't have some triumphant kind of like some other big moment where he did actually die. It would just be like shouting at the wrong person in a bar who then just smack you in the face and then kick your head in and you die. Yeah, or he's like, oh, I'm going to go and get another pimp, and then a pimp shoots him.
Yeah,
that's that.
Exactly, yeah.
And whereas this end scene, this shootout scene, is very stylized to the point where it is like how much of this is his perception of it.
Well, exactly. This is the famous fan theory, one of the most infamous fan theories of how to read a movie in a different way and get a whole new secret meaning out of it. The theory is, guys, that Travis dies at the end of the film. I think the point where he runs in to save Iris, so everything that happens from that point onwards is just either his dying thoughts or him in heaven, or however you want to interpret that.
And let's not forget that at one point he puts the gun to his own head and tries to kill himself. There's no bullets left.
Yes.
There is no intention of him to get out of this alive. And by that point, he's already been shot a couple of times. He's bleeding all over.
Yeah, and he sits down.
And then he slumps onto a settee.
Injured.
And that would be the moment where he's just fading into death, and perhaps his last thoughts are of how he's going to be represented as a hero.
I think that is generally the point you're meant to think, oh, he's dead now. And then we fade up into this bright, colourful, hey, everything's happy and you're a hero. And it's like suddenly everything's really rosy and good and the world's great. I can see how you can read it that way, but I've never thought the film was intended that way. And Martin Scorsese, Robert De Niro, Paul Schrader are all on record saying it's not their intention. It's not how they made it.
I don't think it needs to be, because the way we have it, that he's hailed as a hero, is a comment on society in general. And
that gives the film purpose. Otherwise the film has no point to it. Yeah. The one other element we've not touched on is the music. I think Taxi Driver has quite a famous theme tune. Certainly not up there with Star Wars, but it's still pretty well known. I think it's a really beautiful film score, really wonderful music composed. It's mostly all that main theme done in different ways, but it really adds to the whole dreamlike sort of... Yeah, just wanted to say the music's good.
Yeah, the music has a pretty massive effect on the feel of the film. It's again quite hypnotic. It's these jazzy kind of, but...
Yeah, and it's quite overbearing in places, but again, I think that's by design. It kind of forces you in, like, to transition from one scene into another in this kind of really nice way. But yeah, other things that we've not spoken about, the acting... this is a famous all-time great performance. I think if you were to do a list of the all-time greats, people would go, oh, well, Robert De Niro, he's like the actor, and this is probably the performance he's best known for. And it's not, if I was doing like a top 10 list of my favourite performances of all time, it wouldn't be on it, but it is a really great bit of acting. I think Robert De Niro is a truly, truly, truly fantastic actor. And this is him at his peak, it's hard to take issue with anything he's doing here.
Yeah, it's definitely, he brings that grey area to it, which I think it needs. Like, he's not just playing the surface, he's playing everything underneath. But then you also get all these stories that, he went and worked as a taxi driver in New York for a month, and you just think, come on, mate, take a day off. It's like it just feels like it feels like there's obviously a process there that's working for him. Just refine it down to the bits that are working, figure it out, because there's a lot of slack here that you don't need, I think. Because I don't think working as a taxi driver is the important thing here. Like, go and fight in Vietnam and do that. And see how it feels.
But, yeah, well, to be fair, I think he has. This is very early in his career, and, you know, I think he has refined his craft a bit, to be honest. He doesn't seem to get as silly into it in that level. He still, I think last time he did something like this, he did a couple of stand-up comedy nights because he was preparing for a role. This is a few years ago, or he was preparing for some role as a comedian or something. But to be fair, that having that experience on a stage probably is worthwhile.
That does feel like a valid, worthwhile experience. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm not even saying like go and work as a taxi driver for 2 shifts just to sort of see how people treat a taxi driver, see if they talk to you, see if they. But yeah, go and do it for a month. It's just not necessary, is it?
Yeah, New York's an expensive place to live. I mean, maybe that Vito Corleone money wasn't stretching far enough, and he needed to do something to keep the lights on while he was filming. But no, yeah, and you know, he is the standout performance, but I think the acting's good on the whole.
You got Harvey Keitel, looks like Tommy Wiseau, doing a kind of, I don't know, I'm not convinced by him as a pimp, really. I think it needs to be, but then again, maybe it's just the idea is my idea of what a 70s pimp is going to be is like more cartoonish, I suppose. I think when it comes down to it, it probably wouldn't be that bad.
Yeah.
Who else have we got? You know, Sybil Shepherd apparently they clashed with Scorsese and
oh really, did she?
De Niro and all that. Yeah, she was just a bit shit basically from what I could tell. They felt, and Scorsese was just like literally giving her line reads to get something out of her because he couldn't direct her. Well,
I think she turns in a reasonable enough performance in the film, so you know they got it out of her. Jodie Foster, not like she has much to do in terms of weighty acting, but she's dealing with some pretty heavy subject matter just intrinsically. She's certainly holds her own.
Jodie Foster always seems to have had the maturity. Obviously, she was a child actor for a long time. She always had that maturity beyond her years, and that's what comes through in this character. And it needs to be there if you're going to have that character as a 12-year-old. You know, she needs to be a streetwise 12-year-old. You know, she needs to be a.
Who else we got? Peter Boyle as a fellow cabbie.
Yeah.
Just a dependable guy. Good, enjoyable. And Albert Brooks, I think the youngest I've ever seen Albert Brooks. And therefore kind of the least Albert Brooksy Albert Brooks I've ever seen as well. I love Albert Brooks,
but I understand they were happy for him to improv that and it kind of developed the character much more than it was on the page.
That's what you do with Albert Brooks, isn't it? You just get him in and let him make shit up and fit that into. I mean, that's what he does on The Simpsons, for fuck's sake, which is, you know, one of the most tightly written half hours you'll find. And if they're willing to just let Albert Brooks riff whatever the fuck, then yeah. So yeah, all points covered, all bases covered there, is it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we've
If you've listened to our live episode from a few weeks back, or indeed if you watched it broadcast or watched the video that we've put up since, you may have been wondering what the film poster that I had in the background was that I pointed out at one point. I mean, if you've watched the video, you could probably see, in spite of the glaring light, that it was Taxi Driver. But for those of you who are just listening to the show, this is the reveal. It was Taxi Driver. And the fact that I have a framed poster of it in my home probably indicates that I am a big fan of this film. So I give it a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I think, you know, as I've said, I definitely appreciate this more on an artistic level than a kind of what I would say is just a simple film level. Not that that's a bad thing necessarily, but I mean, I've sung its praises, and you know, the fact that I haven't been able to dwell on the negatives should give you some indication of that they're not strong. But there's definitely, I think it's somewhat a matter of taste as well. This film, all the things that I don't particularly like about this film are there deliberately. It's not a failing. It's just that I'm not a fan of kind of that unfocused nature of that. Well, that depends on the context, I suppose. But it just feels like I want this to be a little bit tighter and clearer, I suppose, which is not what it's doing. But anyway, the point is, I gave it an 8. You know, you can't deny the filmmaking on show here.
Well, I think that sets this in our top 10 of all time until the next live episode where Calvin gives it 5 out of 10 and tanks the whole thing. That makes it our 9th highest film in our top 10. So, yeah, that's all right. I mentioned before that they've spoken about doing a sequel. How do you feel about that? Bad idea, innit? Yeah.
It just doesn't need it.
Yeah, well, De Niro has expressed it on several occasions, just the idea of doing a straight-up sequel in later life. But I remember back in 2015, I believe it was, they announced that they had given the green light. They were officially moving ahead with a bizarre remake of Taxi Driver from Martin Scorsese, Robert De Niro, and I think it was Lars von Trier. And they had all teamed up to, if I remember correctly, the brief they'd given themselves was they were going to remake Taxi Driver, but they were going to find 4 directors, so presumably Lars von Trier, Martin Scorsese, and 2 other people, to produce. I don't know if they were going to do truncated remakes, 4 of them, or like a quarter of the film each, but they were going to adhere to Dogma 95 rules, I think, with how they made the film, and just make it in this weird. So I guess this was pitched and got some traction as more of a thought experiment than like that'll be a great thing to go and watch. It was I can only assume it was meant as more of a
artistic project. Let's make this weird Dogma 95 exercise. We might as well use Taxi Driver because we own the rights, or certainly the credibility to play around with it because it's our film. You know, I think it's just like if they announced the remake of Inception tomorrow, there'd be uproar. But if Christopher Nolan said, I'm doing a fan remake of Inception and I want everyone to submit 30 seconds of animation and we're going to stitch it all together to recreate the movie, that's not the same thing, is it? It's like, that's like an art project. I think that's all this Taxi Driver remake ever was. And, you know, it obviously never got made. And I don't think it is ever going to get made. So they probably realise there's maybe not an appetite for just them flexing their creative chop. I think the one thing I would say in terms of potential for remakes or sequels is that Taxi Driver is a quintessentially American story. It's so rooted in their culture, and certainly in terms of...
Yeah, and it's so rooted in a time and place, New York in the 70s.
Yeah. I think if you were going to do something similar today, you could play it with a school shooter, that kind of idea.
Well, they did last year, didn't they?
What with...
They put a bit of clown makeup on him, Joker.
Well, that's...
I mean, I'm being glib about it, but that is what they did, you know?
In terms of doing a modern take on it.
Yeah, I'm being flippant, but like that is what Joker was. It was a rip-off of Taxi Driver, arguably a modern take on it. But that's, you know, I've brought up my complaints about Joker with people is that, it just ripped off Taxi Driver. It's just Taxi Driver, but not as good. And a lot of people come back at me with, well, it's a modern update of that story for people who aren't going to watch a film from the 70s. And, you know, I not that, I don't know if that's quite valid, and certainly not when you're going out of your way to recreate the 70s in order to give a modern spin on it. But, you know, I think there's an appetite for this story.
But Joker is making a much more definitive point.
Is it?
And it's also,
I would argue it's making less of a definitive point. Our whole Joker episode came down on we don't know what this film is trying to say, didn't it?
Well, I think it's trying to talk about mental illness and the kind of the cultural, the way that's dealt with culturally. I'm not saying it's a successful exploration of that.
So Taxi Driver, though, isn't it? I mean...
Well, I think Taxi Driver is addressing that in a way that is not aware of mental illness in the same way. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just...
Oh, yeah, it's a 1970s, and understanding
exactly.
of it. Yeah.
But whatever's going on with Travis, it's not like he would not be found insane in a court of law by any means. Like, he would be considered culpable for his actions.
Yeah, whereas Joker approaches it with a 1990s understanding of mental health.
Yeah, wacky mental health.
um,
But I think, you could do that. I think the best chance you've got of doing a remake is if you told me, oh, they did an Indian remake of this, and it's kind of obviously just changing some cultural signposts, but essentially doing the same thing, I would bet £1 million it didn't work very well. But I think if you're going to do something like that would be the best way to do it with any chance of not because you're not standing on the toes of the original. I think that's the important thing. You're kind of in a different cultural sphere.
Are you sure there isn't already a...
No, I'm not sure. I wouldn't be at all surprised if there is. And I would, like I say, I would bet that it's terrible and misses the point completely. I think
it is exactly the kind of film that would have had a Bollywood knockoff at some point. I think this is it, though. I think people have been making remakes of this film, but just not just ripping it off. And I think that's been going on for decades, because it is quite a broad framework. I think this film really nailed a specific genre or subgenre, and ever since then it's just been like, right, well, this is the clown superhero take on it, and Paul Schrader's come and made a priest version of it, and there's plenty of films that are kind of riffing on this film. So I guess I can't see them ever doing a remake because it's too easy to just kind of go, well, it's Taxi Driver meets the X-Files or whatever. But then, maybe not. Maybe give it another 10 years after Martin Scorsese's death, and they will just turn around and be like, yeah, we're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, this is 45 years old now, this film, nearly. That's a long time.
and inherently, if you updated it, we've made I've made some really weak, humorous riffs on changes of the times, but ultimately a modern Taxi Driver would have to get into things like social media and Tinder and online porn, and the world has changed.
And also the gun violence question in America has changed, I think, in that time. I think you wouldn't be able to avoid race as a factor.
So if you've enjoyed this has been one of our more po-faced film analysis kind of episodes without us joking around and being silly.
Yeah, we're usually a lot more insincere.
Yeah, well, it depends what we're covering. We actually had film analysis to do this week.
Because it was a good film.
That's it. Yeah. Normally, we don't have any real film analysis to get into, so we just start taking the piss out of like the director's surname or.
Yeah, we've just come off a real Lord of the Rings slog that we've been struggling with.
Yeah. So there you go. But if you've enjoyed this, do check out our pretty vast back catalogue of episodes at this point. dimreturns.com. You can find everything there. Subscribe. If you feel so inclined, we would massively appreciate it if you'd give us a little cheeky rating on iTunes. We've got quite a few ratings now over on the UK iTunes, and a fair few dotted around internationally, but yeah, that is the nicest thing you could do for us, short of subscribing to our Patreon over at patreon.com/dimreturns, where we put up all sorts of bonus episodes and diminisodes, we call them, little mini ones. But we put a few full-length episodes up there as well, and this live episode I alluded to, which went out recently, we broadcast the video stream to our patrons exclusively. We do all sorts of little things on there, so go check it out. $1 a month, and you'll be helping out what we do, if you like it.
Yep.
What's next week, Alan?
Bond?
Ooh. So, yeah, if you're sick of us being positive, come back next week.